What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Salt and Pauper video. My name is Chad. Today we're going to have a slightly different video. For those of you who don't know, I manage a Pauper Cube as well as Pauper Constructed, and I play it fairly often. So today we're going to take a little bit of a look, a deep dive into a write-up by the Pauper Cube community on Discord, and look at the quick hits or the nominees for cube contention out of Phyrexia All Be One. We're going to read through their article and justifications. I'm going to give you my reactions and initial thoughts on cards that may be entering the cube from Phyrexia All Is One. If you're interested at all in checking out the cube, the link will be down in the description, as well as some timestamps down below. So without any further ado, guys, let's hit the intro and let's jump right into it. Alright guys, welcome to the official Pauper Cube website and blog post. We're actually going to be taking a look at their Phyrexia All Be One quick hits as of yesterday, and my initial thoughts, what I agree with, and reactions to their suggestions. So let's jump in with the white suggestions. The first off is going to be this white card, Deulist of Deep Faith. So this is a 2/2 for 2 with Toxic 1. It's a Phyrexian soldier for white and a colorless. You get, as long as it's your turn, it has first strike. So the individual notes here are all based on some of the collaborators as well as the admin or curators of the community cube. And they each kind of have their own thoughts here. So the general thought here is that conditional first strike can be upside if we're looking to improve on aggro, but not if we're looking for a general creature. Usman down here has a great point in that it's a slightly worse youthful knight. Ultimately, I think this card's pretty good. It is a 2/2 for 2, so it's a bear with Toxic 1, which isn't nothing, but the Toxic and Infect theme in the cube is not currently supported. So if we were to make Toxic a thing, it would take a pretty large and sweeping upgrade to the current aggro package to incorporate Infect as well as some pump spells and include Toxic. And I just don't think that that's in the cards for the cube at this point. This is just a pretty good 2/2 for 2 for like the white aggro deck that's currently in the cube, as well as it holds equipment pretty well. Big one being Bone Splitter, and prospectively Barbed Batterfist, which would make this a 3/1 first strike, which isn't bad. But all in all, I think this is a pretty okay card. It's not really a slam dunk. Planar Disruption, on the other hand, is a 2-mana enchantment aura for white and a colorless. You get to enchant an artifact creature or planeswalker, and the enchanted permanent can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be active. This is an incredible card. It's both better pacifism and better arrest at the same time, as kind of summed up by Omni here. There's no way this doesn't make the cut. I'm actually just really unsure as to what the cut will be. I don't know what you cut between pacifism and arrest for this spell. I don't know if you want to upgrade arrest and keep pacifism and this, or if you want to keep arrest and then add this over pacifism. It's a really tough hit for me. But this is almost certainly going to be making the cut, and it seems like the community agrees here. An easy add is the easiest way to sum this up. Basilica Shephard is the next suggested card. It's 5 mana 3/3 with flying that enters with 2 Phyrexian mites. As noted by Omni here, this is really close to a common Cloud Goat Ranger, which was an absolute beast in the limited of Lorwyn. Cloud Goat Ranger is a 3/3 for 5 that makes 3/1/1s. And then you can tap it to give it a buff and fly. Tap them to give Cloud Goat Ranger a buff and flying. Not quite the same here. Not only can the 1/1s block, but they also have added utility, whereas this gives you 2 1/1s that can't block. And as I mentioned before, I don't really like the idea of introducing Toxic to the cube at this point. It would just take too many cards to really make it feel supported. And I don't want to confuse players when they see cards with Toxic and think that that is a supported archetype here. Me personally, I'm probably passing on this. That being said, if we just rule out Toxic on the mites, this does have fairly good upside. This is very close to a side grade to Soul of Migration, potentially. But in general, I like that it creates flying birds. I like that the birds can block. It's a 2/4 body versus a 3/3, which is much harder to interact with in the cube. And they cost very similar mana costs. Soul of Migration is on the top end of that, but it has Evoke, so it also kind of interacts with Flicker in the ways that you want and kind of directs the draft, or at least the drafter, in that direction. So not sure about Basilica Shephard or Crawling Chorus, but that's the next card here. It's my pick for one of the best cards in white, at least for Pauper constructed play. But again, we're looking at cards. This does a very good Doom Traveler impression to me. But I really don't like the idea, again, of adding Toxic without a lot of support, because I don't want to really signal people that that's in the cube when it's not. I want to avoid that kind of confusion while drafting, and I think this just kind of tips it in the wrong direction for me. As far as things like Hunted Witness and Doom Traveler, I think those are absolutely slam dunks in the cube, but this, unfortunately, is kind of a pass. Next, we have Vanish into Eternity, which is a 3-mana instant that can exile a non-land permanent, and you pay 3 more if it targets a creature. In the cube, the majority of things, as Fizzled mentions here, is you're going to target creatures, which makes this a 6-mana instant. And generally speaking, that's not going to be good enough out of white. White has, as we just saw, Planar Disruption. It's got a lot of really efficient aura-based removal, as well as, in general, the white removal suite is very heavily skewed towards an aura kind of toolbox. And that's the identity of white removal at this time in the cube. So if we're going to make a shift into Vanish into Eternity and those type of removal spells, we really have to look at things like Swift Justice, at like some of the damage to attacking creatures, things like Celestial Flare, and we really have to revamp White's removal package, and I just don't think that this card is strong enough to really push us in that direction. Next up is Chrome Prowler here, moving into blue. Looking at this, it's a 3/2 flash for 3. We did currently, or at least recently, have the Demur version with Surveil on it. The 3-drop, 3/2 flash Surveil when it enters the battlefield. And that does a similar impression to this. This is very much just like a Pestermite for me. I kind of agree with Omni here. I just don't see this being worth it. This isn't Frost Trickster. And Pestermite is a little bit better just because it has flying. Really hard to kind of line this up with what we're looking for in the cube, especially with how efficient the 2-drops are. This is often just going to trade down, so it really just doesn't do it for me here. Next up is Experimental Augury. This is the look at the top 3, put 1 in your hand, the rest on the bottom, and then proliferate for 2 at instant, a blue and a colorless. And at the end of the day, while proliferate might be very, very relevant, it's not going to be relevant in blue X colors for the cube. The primary color combination that proliferate would benefit is in green-white in the 1/1 counters sub-theme in the cube. And realistically, I just don't think this card is going to make the cut. And we're not even playing Impulse, which is a very similar version of this card without the proliferate that digs 4 deep. So until we get to a point where Impulse is in the cube, I don't really think we can look at this. I think this card's very, very good and constructed, but unfortunately it's a miss for cube. Next up is Quicksilver Fisher. This is the 4/5 for 5 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, you draw then discard. We have a couple of similar cards, primarily Watcher in the Mist, in the cube currently. And I think that this has a fair shot at making it over Watcher in the Mist specifically. That's oftentimes kind of my least favorite blue flyer at the moment, and they do have a very comparable mana cost at 5. I think this is probably in contention for taking Watcher in the Mist out of the cube. Not a huge fan of this in general. I think it's pretty bad because it's boltable, but 4 power in the air is nothing to kind of overlook in the cube environment right now, and I think this is at least on the discussion list. So we'll be looking more at that and in blue in general to see whether or not this has a home here. Moving into black, we have Annihilating Glare. I definitely expected this to make the quick hit list and warrant some discussion. This is a 1-mana sorcery. It has an additional cost to cast, which is pay 4 or sacrifice an artifact or creature, and then you destroy target creature or planeswalker. Yeah, as Omni says here, this is about as close to Bone Splitters as we're going to get that is playable. Unfortunately, I don't think the utility of being able to sacrifice tokens is really going to put this over the edge, especially because we have things like Cast Down already in the cube, Ob Nixilis Cruelty, stuff like that, so it's really difficult for me to see this making the cut. We can take a more in-depth look at the black removal suite, but I think ultimately this is going to be a pass, although it's probably as close as we're going to get to this kind of variant making the cut in the cube. Next up, we have Dross Skullbomb. This is a card that's been having some talk about it. As little as I personally liked it in the Pauper review, I acknowledge when I'm wrong. This card definitely has some utility in the Pauper metagame, specifically in the Ultratron list, so I was willing to give it another look. In the cube, however, I just don't see this being needed in the colorless slot, especially because we'd have to evaluate this as a black card, and I just don't think that this is going to come close to things like Gravedigger, Unearth, cards that are already in the cube. So I think this is largely a pass for me. We do have Blood Fountain, but at the end of the day, I think Blood Fountain is significantly better than this card. So I think we probably only have room for one of the two, and right now it's definitely Blood Fountain for me. Next, we have Testament Bearer. Testament Bearer is the 4/1 for 4. When it dies, you look at the top 3 cards, put 1 into your hand and the rest in your graveyard. This was really close for me, but I genuinely dislike that this trades with so much of white tokens, red tokens. We have a lot of 1/1 soldiers, a lot of 1/1 goblins in the cube at the moment, and being a 4-drop, it really needs to be able to attack with that aggressive stat line. And trading down just really feels bad for this type of effect. It needed to have some sort of evasion, lifelink, menace, that kind of thing, and we could have been in business here, but unfortunately I think that this is going to be a pass for me. This feels pretty meh for me. I acknowledge that there's some upside in this card. As Neveron says here, it's kind of like a cantripping edict where it's just slow, they attack into it, you trade with a creature, and then you get a card back. But at the end of the day, this feels pretty bad. I wish this was like a 4/2, and then I might be in business. Or I might be on board. Right now, Fizzled makes a good point. Golgari isn't really in the self-mill business at the moment, but if it ever is, this might be a little bit easier to cut into. Next, we take a look at red. We have Barbed Batterfist. This is an absolute slam dunk for me. I think this card's fantastic in Pauper Constructed. In fact, if you check out my best 3 decks from New Phyrexia to try in Pauper video that's coming out very shortly. This card is a powerhouse, and ultimately I think this has a place in cube. I don't quite know where it is yet. Again, we have to rate it as a red card. Not a colorless card. I really wish these weren't color-associated equipment, but at the end of the day, it's a red card. And it is a 3/1, which is not nothing. It's a red 2-drop. Right now, there's a lot of red 2-drops, but I think we can pretty safely find a way to put this in. Leaving behind a 2/2 and giving +1/-1 to something for 1 mana really isn't nothing. I don't like that this doesn't go so well with 1/1 tokens. I think Neveron makes a good point here. Ancestral Blade works very, very well in white because it has a lot of 1/1 tokens to then put it on. This, unfortunately, does not go on any of the Goblin tokens coming out of red, so that is definitely a key contributor to the power level of this card. It's not going to be playable in every red deck, but I think that in a lot of red decks, this is definitely going to be playable. And I'm certainly going to look for a spot for it. Immediately, I don't have a ton of ideas as to what to cut this for. I will be evaluating it as a creature. So my inclination is to take something out like Krenko's Command. You know, one of the Goblin generators that this doesn't go very well with. But ultimately, I'll have to take a look at the card density in red to see what kind of token generators we have that this is going to be anti-synergy with, and try to find something in there that this can swap out for, I think. Don't want to impact the red-white go-wide strategy too heavily with this, though, so we really have to be careful. Next up is Chimney Rabble. This is a 4-drop 3/3 with haste that makes a 1/1 Phyrexian Goblin. Now, this is really interesting to me because we have Beetleback Chief in the cube, and it's very, very good. Haste feels very good as Omni adds here to the discussion, but similar to both Neveron and Omni, I'm not sure what I would cut for this. Looking at the red 4-drops, there's not a ton of just kind of vanilla creatures left in there. Most of the red 4-drops have some sort of important keyword for closing out the game, or card advantage. I think I would look most at something like Famished Foragers here, but unsure what this would come in for. I'm going to take a closer look at red, but not sure. Furnace Strider's really interesting as a 5-drop 4/5 that gives target creature haste. So basically it enters with haste itself if you want it to, and then it can give something else haste on the following turn. Definitely my initial comparison to this is Flurry of Horns, which is a 5-mana spell that makes 2/2/3s with haste. I like that this is one creature with 4 power, which very kind of concisely combats green, which is kind of a problem for red at the moment because they make a lot of really big butt creatures that red can't really attack through if they stabilize in time. But ultimately, I think that if this card goes in, it would be over Flurry of Horns. Just not sure if this is exciting enough to really make that change. I'm not really in favor of making changes just to make changes. I want a compelling reason to make it a change. I think this does give some level of utility to some of the red late game. So you're able to, you know, kind of run this out on 5, attack with it, and then get in there with another creature the next turn to follow up, which is something Flurry of Horns can't really do at the moment. And they are easier to chump block, although it is spread out over multiple bodies. So again, it synergizes more with that red-white go-wide type strategy. Not sure which I like more at the moment. I want to make sure that the red-white go-wide strategy doesn't hurt to support red as an identity for its other things in the way of Barbed Batterfist and this Furnace Strider edition. So it's going to take some fine-tuning, but we'll take a look. Next up is Blazing Crescendo. This is an absolute home run of a card again. +3/+1 instant for 2 mana, and it exiles the top card of your library, and until the end of the next turn you may play it. We already have the 2-drop that exiles the top 2 cards and lets you play both until next turn. So this seems pretty good. Ultimately, I think this is too close to... this is too dependent on it resolving on a creature, and ultimately in a cube full of premium removal, that's not the best option. I think that in general, this card is akin to like Lightning Strike with draw a card, right? Because you're going to be adding 3 damage, and then you're going to be exiling a card or impulsing a card. So, really not sure whether or not you would want this card in red over something like a Bolt or Lightning Strike or, you know, a Searing Spear, that sort of thing, as Usman at the bottom here pretty astutely draws the conclusion to. At the end of the day is the ability to target a creature and get your creatures through to remove a blocker better than just making your creature big enough to eat said blocker. It does cost you damage in the long run because you're not able to get in with that chip damage after you remove the blocker, but you draw a card to replace itself. Really tough to weigh out this one. I'm willing to put this on the watch list. I definitely want to try to put this in. But it's interesting to compare this to Balduvian Rage and Fists of Flame, neither of which are in the cube currently, so definitely not 100% shoe-in for me, but it's something that I want to look at. It's an absolute slam dunk in Constructed, but again, that's not always a direct translation to cube, so we'll take a closer look at the red buff package. I suspect that it's going to be close. I just don't know if it has a home yet. Maybe if something like the Impulse Draw, Spells Matter type archetype in is better, then this looks for it, but we'll see. Next up in green is Contagious Vorrac. This is the 3/3 for 3 that when it enters, you look at the top 4, and you can put a land card from among them into your hand, and if you don't, you can proliferate. So, in general, green's 3-drop slots are very lacking. They're not very good. Jewel Thieves is an absolute slam dunk, but that's really the only slam dunk at the green 3-drop stage outside of maybe Llanowar Visionary being the other. Not sure how much I want 3/3 Satyr Wayfinder. But I do like the fact that this has Proliferate on it, and that is definitely relevant in green-white. So if we do have room for a slightly less, flashy 3-drop that just kind of puts in the work for green-white, I'm not opposed to finding a slot for this at all. We'll take a look to see what's kind of where this would fit. I suspect it would go in place of the 3/2 that currently draws cards and costs less for each 1/1 counter you have on the board. But I think that's really the only slot that comes to mind that this is in contention for. Both are kind of that 1/1 synergy support slot. And just not sure which one I like more, to be honest. And then finally we close out with the colorless draw lands. So it's definitely interesting. Yeah, I think Usman's comment here pretty much sums up my my same thoughts about this land cycle, which is I think that these cycle lands are better at doing what these lands want to do, which is being bad top decks in the late game. That being said, I do see some value in having these available. Specifically in like the white and green colors, because they genuinely lack draw a lot of the time. And the other 3 colors seem to have it in spades, so I'm wondering if maybe there's some utility land slots that we may be able to flex these in for. I don't know that we could run a partial cycle in the cube and make it feel fair. We'd have to look at these like green and white cards respectively, or maybe colorless cards instead of basic land or non-basic lands, since that pretty much always has to be an even spread in terms of support. But yeah, not 100% sure what I would put these in for, or if I even want to try to find a slot for them. But ultimately, it's interesting. I like that we have this option available to us in Pauper now. We're really starting to get a lot of utility lands in the Pauper format. And I'm interested to see what else we get as the common power creep starts to really elevate our land base specifically. So Thank you so much for tuning in and going through this with me. I hope you enjoyed my elaboration and kind of thought process on what I look at in terms of when I update the cube, and how I kind of evaluate the cards that may or may not be going in, and what I'm looking for in terms of when I try to continue support for something that's already there, or pull the trigger and support something new and make a bunch of swaps. That's often the hardest thing to do in cube curation, which is to kind of decide when to change directions and when to stay the course. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you want to help out the channel, honestly, just share this to another Pauper player or another cube player. Let them jump on and enjoy the content with you. Make sure you sub to the channel, guys. It really does help. And as usual, guys, goodbye forever, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.